Welcome to the Eonics podcast, a podcast about software engineering, new ways of working, and lots of other interesting stuff. I have a completely new guest today, Jeroen Vrijkorte. Welcome.
Hi.
Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jeroen Vrijkorte. I'm lead architect at company Postuma Partners in Gouda, and I'm an Azure and .NET specialist.
Okay. You gave a hack night at Eonics, and the subject was Bicep.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of people that might not be familiar, but maybe let's start at the beginning. How did you discover Bicep as a technology?
This has to do with the cloud journey we are making at Postuma Partners. So actually we're fairly new Azure customers, just started slightly more than a year ago. And something that we encountered fairly quickly is that, we have several applications, but one primary one that we use a lot in Azure. And for this application, we need to create a different environment for each customer. And we have several customers, and they need to have both a test environment and a production environment. And before we were using Bicep, we had to create these environments by hand.
Okay.
Which was obviously quite a lot of work, also error prone. So we needed a way to automate that. And I was already familiar with ARM templates. It's basically the predecessor of Azure Bicep. So that's something we considered using. But then I found that there was something better called Bicep. And we decided to use that. And actually we're very happy with it. It's really great improvement over our ARM. It's easier to use, easier to get started with, and easier to read as well. So it's also better to maintain. So overall, we're very content with using Azure Bicep. We decided to integrate it into our build system, so we can now do fully automated deployments of new environments. We also have version control of our environments. And we can easily do maintenance on our environments and deploy them consistently. So it's really a big improvement for us.
So is this the infamous buzzword applies here, infrastructure as code?
Yeah, that is indeed the term that's used for this approach. Yeah,
because it's a certain language which is where you write in to deploy automatically, and because it's in code, you can put it on the version control, and you can introduce new stuff or go back to a previous thing and then automatically deploy it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But is that the only function, or is there other things you can do with? Like, is it a deployment language basically for Azure, or does it have other applications?
No, it's very domain specific. It's exactly as you said. It's an infrastructure as code language specifically for Azure deployments. There's nothing else that I know of that you can do with Bicep, except maybe entertain yourself in some way.
So this is the specific use case. So it's not like a programming language in the general sense.
No, definitely not.
And how do you see the difference in practice?
It's very limited in scope. Actually, Bicep. Well, it's great at what it does.
Right.
It's absolutely the best thing for script. Well, not really scripting, but coding your Azure deployments. I'm pretty sure that Bicep will be the best solution for that. But you can't write a general purpose language or program with Bicep.
You can have some logic, for example, or...
Yeah, some basic logic is possible. So as we discussed in the workshop, it's a declarative language, maybe a little bit similar to GNU Make. It's much older, but conceptually there are some things that you can compare. So you can make some expressions, like you have a for loop in Bicep, but it's not really a coding structure. Yeah, how do we explain it? It's basically a way to declare several instances of a resource, several resources that are very similar.
Right, so you say, I want 5 of something.
Yeah, exactly. I want 5 app services, 5 databases, 5 storage accounts. Right. You can do that with a loop construct, so that you don't have to specify all 5 of them explicitly.
So the use case for Bicep is basically if you find yourself using Azure a lot and you're also specifically creating new environments all the time, this is basically where it comes in handy.
Then it's definitely handy. But even if you're not creating new environments, also the maintenance for your existing environments, then it's very helpful. For example, you can declare alert rules in Bicep, which allows you to specify certain kinds of alerts. For example, that you get an email if your web service is producing a lot of errors, for example, something like that.
Okay.
You can deploy that via Bicep. And this is especially useful if you have several applications for which you want the same rule. Then you can deploy it or copy the same alert rule in different Bicep files and deploy it in that way.
So even if you work at a shop where, I don't know, you're working on one application or at least one application stack, in Azure, it could still be a useful tool.
Yeah, I think so. Also for the version control of the infrastructure.
Right.
Because otherwise you don't really know. Maybe somebody clicked a check mark somewhere and now it's fast and then it's slow and who knows what happens.
Right. Oh, because if you would configure to the interface or change configuration options, it's very difficult to find out who changed something.
Well, you can find it in Azure through something called the activity log.
Okay.
But I think if you have it in Git, for example, and you always deploy from there, it's a little bit more robust.
Right.
You can also perform a code review on the infrastructure changes. That's a little bit harder to do if you always work through the Azure portal, for example.
Right. And is there any alternative in practice?
Yeah, you have ARM templates, which is basically the predecessor for Bicep. Maybe you would want to use them for backwards compatibility, or if you already have a lot of them. But actually, I think Bicep more or less makes them obsolete, at least for the infrastructure as code use case. And you could write a PowerShell script to deploy resources, but I don't really think that is a great solution. I think Bicep would be better because you have to write less logic and you just declare the resources that you want and Azure takes care of creating them. And there's also something called Azure Blueprints.
Okay.
But to be honest, I'm not overly familiar with them. But Azure Blueprints is also a way to create copies of environments or at least of certain policies. But I have to admit, I have never used them in practice, so I wouldn't really be able to tell if it would be a suitable alternative for Bicep.
Right, and this might be a really stupid question, so bear with me. I assume what is basically happening is if you want to create something on Azure, you're basically calling some API, right?
If you want to create a resource.
A resource, right. So is it possible to do something like instead of using Bicep, could you write like a Python script that does something similar, or how?
Yeah, I think you can do that. Yeah.
Okay, but then Bicep is better because it's built by Microsoft and you can be sure that everything works as expected. And
yeah, it's fully feature complete with ARM. So everything you can do in Azure, you can basically do with Bicep.
Okay, yeah. And if you would write your own scripts, then you always have to wonder, like, oh, is it up to date?
I think it will be a little bit more complicated. I don't really see a point of doing it that way.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking, you have to learn like a new language, kind of. But
but that's going to be easier than messing with the API, I think.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Is it very easy to learn?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like it's comparable to something like, maybe to give an idea to people.
It's JSON with a few extras.
Okay. That sounds reasonable.
But especially if you use Visual Studio Code, as you also saw during the workshop, with the Bicep extension, it's really very easy to author these files because you get so much assistance from the editor. Like what are valid keywords? What is expecting from me?
Oh, that also helps a lot.
Yeah, that makes them really easy to author. There are, of course, a few things that are a little bit more difficult, like you need to know the name of the resources and which properties you need for certain things. That's not always obvious. But in general, it's very easy language to learn, I find.
And very well integrated into the IDE and stuff.
Yes, definitely. So personally, I use Visual Studio Code with Bicep. I think there's also a support in Visual Studio itself.
Right.
But you can use Visual Studio Code on any platform. So
Right. And maybe going back to what you were mentioning, you've given the Hack Night, and we made a recording of that. People can go watch that on YouTube. I'll put the link also in the show notes below. But maybe you can give a bit of a short summary, an overview of what they can expect if they watch the Hack Night, like what you discuss.
Yeah, so I provide some general information about Bicep, Bicep, a little bit similar to what we just discussed. And then I think the most interesting part is the hands-on part,
right?
Which contains various exercises where we're actually going to get our hands dirty with Bicep. And I've structured those exercises or challenges in such a way that I think there's a little bit for everyone here. If you're completely new to Bicep, you get to use it and see how it works. But even if you're an experienced Azure developer, I've put a little few tricks in there, especially in the last challenge, where I think even then you will take something away from it. So I've really tried to make it in such a way that it's interesting for everybody, and anybody who's a developer or occasionally working with Azure or working a lot with Azure can take something away from this.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeroen, for sharing your knowledge.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure as well.
And hope to see you another time.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks.